So I do my best thinking in the shower. And a friend of mine gave me a reason for this, and that is a shower kind of acts like a deprivation tank. You turn on the water, it drowns out the sound. The water's the right temperature, you stop feeling it. You close your eyes and the rest of the world disappears. And that's where I do my best thinking. We live in a very visual world. When we're not staring at what's around us, we're staring at our phones, YouTube, Vines, whatever it is. We are visual creatures. We evolved that way. We make great use of our vision. But imagine explaining to a blind person what a rainbow is. Someone who has absolutely no experience of light, no experience what color is. I've had the fortune for the last several years of working with the blind on studies of the brain and how blindness affects the way it's organized. The blind are amazing people. They navigate our visual world using canes. They read with their fingertips. They use the rest of their senses to make their way through a world that we navigate with our eyes. And when they have free time, they do amazing things, like they go skeet shooting and can blow a clay pigeon out of the air following its sound. They play something called beep ball, which is just a regular softball, except it's got a speaker in it. And the only people on the pitch who have any vision are the pitcher and the catcher. They ski down hills at 70 miles an hour, listening to someone in front of them going, left, right, bump, drop. To me, that is astonishing. And the thing that's astonishing about it is this piece of cholesterol and protein does it for them. This thing that took millions of years to evolve and evolved around a visual system somehow does it without it. The classical view of the brain is that we have areas of the brain that are committed to certain functions. The back of our brain in particular is devoted to processing vision. Other areas of our brain form other functions. But the hundreds of billions of neurons in our brains, wired together with trillions of connections, do more than just see and hear. The development of the brain is one of the most remarkable things in my mind. We actually start out with way more neurons than we need. And brain development is actually more like sculpting. We start out with too many, and slowly our experience sculpts away, trims away those things we don't use, the areas we don't need. So the question arises, what happens with the blind? How does their brain create connections that give rise to what I consider to be a metaphor machine? Our brains aren't computers, our brains are metaphor machines. They create connections out of things that they learn and then extrapolate to new areas. So I happen to use really big magnets to study the brain. This thing has a magnetic field about 90,000 times stronger than the Earth's magnetic field. I put people in it and I can look at the structure and function of their brain. And the question is, if the back of the brain is devoted to vision, and I can see that by putting sighted people in there and simply showing them pictures, the back of their brain lights up. That's what we'd expect. But what happens in the blind? What happens when they don't have vision? I didn't know. So we started looking at this, and dozens of researchers around the world have been doing this. And what we find is that the visual cortex of the blind is very active. It responds to sounds and touch. It responds to speech. It responds when you ask it to remember things. It can predict what's going to happen next. It basically is the mind's eye in the blind. Our brains are huge networks. They're drawing associations all the time. Whatever's going on around you, you're pulling in and turning into this massive network. This is how we build metaphors. And it happens not only figuratively, it happens in the brain as neural systems actually adapt and do new things for us. We use metaphors all the time. Make ends meet, tie the knot. We scribble little black and white lines on paper and they turn into symphonies. Watch a little kid with a Lego that zooms around. It's not a Lego, it's a plane. That's what metaphors are. And I'll give you a very specific example of this. If you have damage to your right parietal lobe, that dark area there, it leads to something called hemi-neglect, which means you basically neglect half the space in front of you. This happens after stroke once in a while. And when it happens, those people, if you ask them to do things like draw a clock face, well, they'll draw the clock, but they'll leave out half the numbers on the left. If you give them a house, they'll draw a house, except they'll leave out half of it. Now, if you close your eyes, you could draw a clock better than they can. So this isn't blindness. Really easy test. You put a line in front of them and have them bisect it. You and I would probably draw a line where that blue line is. They'll put it over where that right line is. And this is where metaphor happens. If you give them two numbers, 7 and 19, for example, and say, what number falls roughly in between? Don't calculate, just do it. They'll say 15. You and I would probably say 12 or 13. It's because the metaphor that we use for numbers has borrowed the space in the brain that we use for creating space. So what the blind have told me is that it isn't what you touch or what you see. Here's a blind woman feeling a 3D printout of of an ultrasound. What we learn from the blind is that it's not what you see or what you hear, it's what you feel, it's what you build inside your mind, and that is what we are. And so it took me a long time to get to this point, but there comes a time when the blind man takes your hands and says, "Don't you see?" Thanks very much.